It's a protein made using the yeast system as your producer. So anybody who can make hepatitis B vaccine can make this.
Western cities like London are opening up as Omicron variant cases continue to fall. However, all along scientists have warned that COVID-19 variants will continue to spread if we don't help all countries get the vaccines they need.
Cost and access are two of the biggest obstacles, but a group from the Texas Children's Hospital Center for Vaccine Development have put people ahead of profit and created what's being called the People's Vaccine, which could be a global game changer.
So this is free science. You've decided not to patent it. Why is that?
Well, what's in it for us is to, help those who are in need, right? Not only morally, but it's ethically, what we had to do. Of course, historically, we knew that, why put a barrier of intellectual property when the aspiration is, in fact, that this is a shared effort, right, to do hard work in our labs. We're the creators, inventors, that's what academia does.
Microbiologists Dr. Maria Bottazi and Dr. Peter Hotez lead the team that created the Corbevax vaccine for COVID-19. In 2011, they started working on a vaccine for coronaviruses. Before the COVID pandemic, two epidemics had occurred. There was severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, in 2003, and the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, or MERS, in 2013.
But when those outbreaks ended, the funding dried up. Then SARS-CoV-2 appeared and Dr. Bottazi and her team started again. But once again, public and private funding was hard to come by. It's a small team, and it was perceived vaccine development would take longer compared to efforts from larger laboratories with more resources.
But they didn't give up, producing a vaccine based on recombinant proteins, a traditional technology which can be made all over the world, and her team was happy to hand over the recipe.
We needed to ensure that we use technologies that would be easy to transfer, already maybe even known in the ecosystem of vaccine development, accessible and affordable reagents, and that at least had precedent of that they worked, right? So hepatitis B vaccine, pertussis vaccines, papillomavirus vaccines. We've been primarily working in the area of recombinant protein technologies for years. That doesn't mean we, of course, don't also work in these innovative technologies, but we knew that they would take a little longer before they could, potentially be made indigenously. So we continue trailing along with balancing our portfolio, primarily using these conventional technologies.
All vaccines are trying to train your immune system to recognize and fight off a pathogen without the body having been infected. They do that by training it to recognize a protein on the surface of the pathogen, which in the case of SARS-CoV-2 is the spike protein. So what's the difference between a recombinant protein vaccine and mRNA vaccines such as Moderna and Pfizer? Messenger ribonucleic acid, or mRNA for short, is a single-stranded molecule. It acts as a messenger carrying genetic code from RNA in a cell's nucleus to ribosomes, the cell's protein-making machinery. It's this process the vaccine taps into, giving the ribosomes new instructions to carry out. The vaccine instructs your cells to make the spike protein found on the surface of the virus. This causes your body to create antibodies, which will fight the virus if you become infected. But with the recombinant protein vaccine, the protein itself is given to the patient, inducing an immune response. It's cheaper and faster to make, and with many recombinant proteins, there are no animal or human derivatives. Everything is synthetic. But if you're going to treat a pandemic, you need a lot of it.
Dr. Bottazi, how do you make this vaccine?
So it's made in yeast. So it's a protein, of course, made recombinantly, which means that you make them in the laboratory using the yeast system as your producer. And the yeast system is a great producer. I mean, we know this from, the fact that we brew beer from yeast, right? They're avid growers, and they, of course, if you modify them, we don't ask them to make alcohol, but we ask them to make proteins.
A small piece of DNA is selected from the virus and inserted into the manufacturing yeast cells, which then produce proteins.
So we don't actually have to worry about very complicated purification processes. We just, extract them out of the broth of this fermentation, almost limitless the amount of proteins you can make. Then you put them in a correct, of course, formulation with immunostimulants so that they can very directly and very robustly induce immune responses in our body. So it jumps over. We ask our body not to have to modify too much the process. Like an RNA has to eventually become a protein before it can be presented to the immune system. So we basically just give the body directly the protein, and it can be rapidly chopped up and presented to our immune system.
The body sees the protein and responds by producing neutralizing antibodies.
Because we put in these immunostimulants, it also activates other aspects of the immune system, cellular responses, cytokines and all sorts of, the whole army of the immune system. And eventually, if indeed you get exposed to the virus, you already have the little army and cadets and, and generals and all the response ready to really block and neutralize the virus. And it prevents, of course, the fact that this virus eventually gets into our cells and cause the clinical symptoms.
The team partnered with Biological E, a large vaccine manufacturer in India, to progress development. To gain emergency authorization in India, 2 phase 3 clinical trials were conducted with more than 3,000 participants ages 18 to 80. It showed the vaccine was more than 80% effective against the Beta and Delta variants, and they're waiting for results against Omicron.
The instructions on how to make this vaccine will be given to anyone who asks. And because it's a conventional vaccine, many countries already have the facilities and scientists in place, so we'll no longer have to ask Big Pharma and richer countries for help.
We have given our technology, our starter kits to not only India, but Indonesia, Bangladesh, and working, of course, to build capacity in Africa. There's anybody who can make hepatitis B vaccine can make this. We know that it probably can even be made, stored, and not have these very short expiration dates, because these proteins, once they're formulated, they can last for years in the refrigerator.
Do you think the hesitancy and anxiety we're seeing around vaccinations, do you think that might be eased because your vaccine is more conventional?
We think that it can have a real, not only game changer in capacity of production, right, and transferability and reproducibility, around the world, which you need a lot of doses to be made, but also the fact that it comes with, safety records of prior, recombinant protein-based vaccines that parents especially have been using for years in their little kids. So it may induce a better acceptance of parents to use them for their kids, but also for themselves.
The Oxford University Research Initiative Our World in Data reports that just over 60% of the world has received at least one vaccine dose, but that drops to just over 10% in low-income countries. Dr. Bottazi and her team are hoping to end the inequality of healthcare and vaccine inequity in the world, and they're not the only ones.
There's many groups that we have been charging and championing, this concept of, decolonization, indigenous, self-sufficiency, enabling others to have self-reliance, right? We can go on and on. Certainly our partners at the International Vaccine Institute, have the similar like-minded vision and mission. PATH, has been working, years. In fact, PATH was the leader in bringing the hepatitis B, that fact that it was developed and took more than 20 years before it was actually accessible and that could reach populations in the global south. So we're many. Sometimes we don't get, the visibility that maybe some of the multinationals get, but we have been there, and now hopefully we will get more recognized, and people will champion more these types of ideas.
In India, Corbevax has now been approved for use in children aged 12 to 18. And elsewhere, a World Health Organization scheme will share mRNA technology know-how to Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa and Tunisia, which will hopefully go some way to redressing vaccine inequity.
It's
finished already. But don't worry, we've got loads more razor stories for you. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe and hit the bell button below for notifications. We'll see you next time.